The sea churns violently off the coast of Actium in 31 BCE. Two fleets face each other in the waters of the Ionian Sea, one commanded by Marcus Agrippa, the brilliant naval commander serving Octavian, the other led by Mark Antony and Cleopatra. The very soul of Rome hangs in the balance. This isn't merely another battle in Rome's long history of civil conflicts. This moment will fundamentally transform warfare for centuries to come. As Agrippa's lighter, more maneuverable Liburnian warships encircle Antony's heavier quinqueremes, the tactical brilliance becomes apparent. Agrippa has blocked Antony's escape routes, forcing him to fight or surrender. But away from the immediate action, Octavian, soon to become Augustus, watches with calculated patience. He's playing a much longer game than anyone realizes. Antony's fleet attempts a breakout. Cleopatra's ships suddenly raise their sails and flee through a gap in the blockade. Antony, seeing his lover escape, abandons his men and follows her. It's a devastating betrayal that seals the battle's outcome. His abandoned forces fight on briefly before surrendering to Octavian. But while historians have long focused on the battle itself, few have recognized what Octavian was truly orchestrating. Not just a military victory, but the first step in a revolutionary transformation of Rome's entire military system. A transformation that would create the most formidable fighting force the ancient world had ever seen. How did Rome reach this critical juncture? The Republic had been decaying for decades. What had once been a balanced constitutional system where power was carefully distributed among elected officials and the Senate had descended into factional violence and military strongmen. The assassination of Julius Caesar in 44 BCE had created a catastrophic power vacuum. Caesar's murder, intended to restore republican liberty, instead plunged Rome deeper into civil war. In the chaos that followed, three men formed an uneasy alliance, known as the Second Triumvirate: Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir; Mark Antony, Caesar's trusted lieutenant; and Marcus Lepidus, a political survivor. But such power-sharing arrangements are inherently unstable. Lepidus was quickly marginalized, and tensions between Octavian and Antony grew until they erupted into open conflict. What makes Octavian's rise so remarkable is how unlikely it seemed at first. When Caesar was assassinated, Octavian was just 19 years old, physically frail and politically inexperienced. He faced veteran commanders like Antony, who commanded the loyalty of battle-hardened legions. Yet through patient alliance building, strategic marriages, and careful cultivation of military loyalty, he outmaneuvered them all. Many dismissed Octavian as a sickly boy playing at politics, wrote the historian Velleius Paterculus, until they realized, too late, the steel beneath, the fragile exterior. The military transformation Octavian would initiate wasn't merely about tactics or weapons. It represented an entirely new system of power, one that would reshape the Roman world for the next 5 centuries. This revolution would be so subtle, so gradual, that even those living through it barely perceived the profound changes until they were irreversible. To understand the magnitude of Augustus's military reforms, we must first understand what came before. The Republican military structure had evolved over centuries to serve a city-state, gradually expanding its influence over Italy and the Mediterranean. Citizens served temporarily, providing their own equipment based on wealth class, and returned to civilian life after campaigns. Command rotated annually among elected magistrates, consuls and praetors, who might have little military experience. This system had distinct disadvantages. The Roman historian Polybius notes how commanders often take the field with no experience of military affairs, leading to serious defeats. Annual rotations meant campaigns lacked continuity, with new commanders frequently abandoning their predecessors' strategies to pursue personal glory. Contrast this with the Augustan system we'll examine. Permanent professional legions stationed at strategic points throughout the empire, commanded by carefully selected legates answerable to a single commander-in-chief, the emperor himself. The transformation in military effectiveness would be profound. But Augustus's challenge wasn't simply designing a better military. It was doing so while maintaining the illusion that the Republic still functioned. As the military historian Adrian Goldsworthy notes, Augustus's genius lay not in creating new institutions, but in repurposing existing ones to serve his needs while maintaining their traditional appearance. The timeline of this transformation spans decades, from the chaotic Civil War period, 49-31 BCE, where generals raised personal armies that fought each other across the Republic's territories, through the careful reforms of the early Augustan period, 30-20 BCE, to the mature imperial military system evident by Augustus' death in 14 CE. When we examine the battlefield organization before and after Augustus, the differences are striking. Republican armies operated as independent units under politically appointed commanders with varying degrees of coordination. Imperial legions functioned as parts of a unified military machine with standardized equipment, training, and chain of command leading ultimately to the emperor. A crucial tactical disadvantage of the Republican system became evident during the Civil Wars. Divided command created battlefield confusion and strategic incoherence. During the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BCE, Pompey's senatorial commanders argued so intensely over tactics that they compromised their numerical advantage against Caesar's more disciplined force. Such discord would become increasingly rare under the imperial system, where command unity was paramount. The military reforms Augustus instituted didn't emerge from a vacuum. They built upon changes already set in motion by his predecessors. Gaius Marius had opened legion recruitment to propertyless citizens in 107 BCE, creating the first steps toward a professional army. Sulla had marched his legions on Rome itself in 88 BCE, demonstrating that legions could become political weapons in the hands of ambitious generals. And Julius Caesar had shown how personal loyalty from troops could translate into political power through his Gallic campaigns. By the time Octavian defeated Antony at Actium, the Roman military system faced an existential crisis. The civil wars had bloated the legions to unsustainable numbers. Over 60 legions existed by some accounts, compared to the 28 Augustus would eventually maintain. Tens of thousands of veterans demanded land settlements, threatening Italy's social stability. Military loyalties remained divided among competing generals, and the treasury stood depleted after decades of conflict. "Consider the impossible situation Augustus inherited," wrote military historian Jonathan Roth. "An oversized army consuming resources the state couldn't provide, veterans expecting rewards it couldn't deliver, and a traditional command structure that guaranteed future civil conflicts. The miracle isn't that he reformed this system, but that he did so without triggering another round of civil wars." As we'll see, Augustus's vision for military reform was comprehensive. A standing professional army loyal to the state, effectively, himself, strategically distributed throughout the empire to control troublesome provinces and defend borders, with standardized equipment, training, and organization to maximize combat effectiveness. But the true brilliance of Augustus's military transformation lay in how he executed it. This wasn't a sudden revolution that might provoke resistance. It was a masterfully orchestrated series of subtle changes, each appearing reasonable in isolation, that collectively transferred control of Rome's military power from the Senate and people to the emperor alone. And he did it so carefully, so gradually, that even the Senate didn't fully realize what was happening until it was too late to reverse. As the ancient writer Dio Cassius observed, Augustus took all the power of the people and Senate into his hands while preserving the appearance of traditional government. The Roman military that Augustus inherited represented both the Republic's greatest achievement and its most dangerous liability. How could any state survive when its defensive apparatus had become the very weapon tearing it apart? This paradox formed the central challenge of Augustus's military reforms. To appreciate the transformation Augustus engineered, we must first understand the Republican military structure that preceded him. For centuries, Rome's legions had been composed primarily of citizen soldiers, farmers and property owners who temporarily set aside civilian pursuits to fulfill their military obligation. Service was both a duty and a privilege of citizenship, with equipment provided by the soldiers themselves according to their wealth class. The Republican Legion, writes military historian Adrian Goldsworthy, was not a permanent institution, but was raised for specific campaigns and disbanded once these were over. This temporary nature created significant operational challenges. Training standards varied widely, institutional knowledge was lost between campaigns, and tactical innovations often died with the generals who developed them. Command structure presented even greater vulnerabilities. Authority over legions belonged to elected magistrates, primarily consuls and praetors, who served one-year terms. These men were politicians first and generals second, often with minimal military experience. One year, a brilliant commander might lead Rome's forces. The next, an incompetent aristocrat whose qualification was family name rather than tactical acumen. Imagine yourself as a centurion in such a system. Your life depends on the military judgment of a man who might never have seen battle before assuming command. How would you respond when his orders contradicted battlefield realities you'd witnessed firsthand in previous campaigns? This structural tension created chronic leadership problems throughout the Republican period. The system's fundamental weakness became evident during the crisis of the late Republic. In 107 BCE, facing manpower shortages during the Jugurthine War, the general Gaius Marius implemented reforms that would unwittingly set Rome on the path to imperial military structure. By recruiting from the propertyless masses, the capitae censi or headcount, Marius created a new type of soldier, men who viewed military service not as a temporary civic duty, but as a career path and route to social advancement. Marius's new legionaries, notes historian Pat Southern, looked to their general rather than to the state for their future security. This subtle shift in loyalty would have profound consequences. When soldiers depend on their commander for land grants and retirement benefits, their allegiance naturally flows toward the individual rather than the institution. The personal army had arrived, and with it, the seeds of civil war were planted. Consider the case of Lucius Cornelius Sulla. In 88 BCE, when the Senate attempted to transfer command of the Mithridatic War from Sulla to his rival Marius, Sulla made an unprecedented decision. He marched his legions on Rome itself. No Roman commander had ever turned the Republic's armies against its own capital. The psychological barrier against using Roman troops against Rome had been shattered, never to be fully restored. One veteran of this period described the transformation. "We no longer fought for Rome's glory, but for which great man would rule Rome. Our swords became pawns in their political games." This sentiment captures the fundamental shift from institutional to personal loyalty that undermined the Republican military system. Julius Caesar's conquest of Gaul, 5850 BCE, accelerated this dangerous trend. Over 8 years of continuous campaigning, Caesar forged his legions into a superb fighting force with unshakable loyalty to him personally. His soldiers didn't identify primarily as servants of Rome, but as Caesar's men. When the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen in 49 BCE, his response, crossing the Rubicon with the 13th Legion, triggered the civil war that would ultimately destroy the Republic. What would you do if you commanded Rome's military power, but saw the political institution you served corrupted by factionalism and self-interest? Would you surrender your authority and accept potential prosecution, or use your military advantage to secure your position? This dilemma faced every successful general of the late Republic, and few chose institutional loyalty over self-preservation. By the time Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra at Actium, the Roman military faced multiple existential challenges. Over 60 legions existed, far more than the state could afford to maintain. Veterans from multiple factions demanded land grants and retirement benefits. Command loyalties remained fractured among competing generals. The treasury stood depleted. After decades of warfare, the most pressing issue was the sheer size of the military. During a speech before the Senate recorded by Dio Cassius, Augustus reportedly stated, "We cannot maintain all these men under arms without bankrupting the state, yet we cannot dismiss them without creating dangerous enemies." The demobilization of excess forces represented both a logistical and security challenge of unprecedented scale. Archaeological evidence from veteran colonies established in this period reveals the magnitude of the task. In colonies like Augusta Emerita, modern Merida, Spain, and Augusta Praetoria, modern Aosta, Italy, thousands of veterans received land allotments. Boundary markers and land survey records show the careful planning required to settle these potentially dangerous men without triggering social unrest. Augustus's solution was brilliantly multifaceted. First, he reduced the bloated legions from over 60 to a more sustainable 28. Second, he personally supervised the settlement of veterans, distributing land and monetary bonuses from his own resources, creating direct patron-client relationships between himself and former soldiers. Third, he stationed the remaining legions in provincial locations far from Rome, breaking with Republican tradition that had kept Italy largely free of permanent military presence. But Augustus's most revolutionary reform involved fundamentally changing the nature of military service and command. Under his new system, soldiers would enlist for fixed 20-year terms, receiving regular pay during service and retirement benefits upon honorable discharge. Legions became permanent institutions with continuous histories, standards, and traditions, fostering unit cohesion and institutional memory previously impossible under the temporary levy system. A military diploma discovered at Carnuntum on the Danube frontier illustrates this new professional status. Dated to 65 CE but following Augustan precedent, it states, "Having served 24 years and being granted honorable discharge, to these men who have served in the army, I grant citizenship for themselves, their children and descendants, and the right of legal marriage with the wives they had when citizenship was granted to them." Such documents transformed military service from a temporary burden into a coveted career path offering social advancement. A common soldier from the provinces could earn Roman citizenship, legal privileges, and financial security through loyal service, creating powerful incentives for discipline and institutional loyalty. Command structure underwent equally profound changes. Augustus formally retained the Senate's authority to assign governors to provinces, but through his position as consul, and later through his proconsular imperium maius, superior proconsular power, he effectively controlled all military appointments. Provincial governors commanding legions were now carefully selected by the emperor, rather than determined by senatorial politics. The brilliance of this system was its outward maintenance of republican forms, while completely rewiring the underlying power dynamics. As the historian Ronald Syme observed, Augustus created a standing professional army, loyal to a single commander, himself, while maintaining the pretense of traditional government. For the ordinary legionary, this transformation offered unprecedented stability. No longer would soldiers find themselves on opposing sides of civil conflicts as generals competed for power. The new imperial army promised regular pay, defined terms of service, and secure retirement, powerful incentives that helped overcome any sentimental attachment to republican ideals. The transition to this professional force wasn't instantaneous. Archaeological evidence from early Augustan military camps shows a gradual standardization of equipment, fortifications, and organization. Excavations at sites like Haltern in Germany reveal the evolution of the rectangular playing card, forti, design that would become standard throughout the empire. Weapons and armor increasingly followed uniform patterns, enhancing unit interchangeability and simplifying logistics. But Augustus knew that creating this military machine required a deception so masterful that even the Senate wouldn't realize what was happening until it was too late. By maintaining traditional language, preserving ceremonial roles for senators, and emphasizing continuity with republican practices, he disguised revolutionary changes as mere administrative reforms. The military historian Adrian Goldsworthy summarizes this achievement. Augustus created an entirely new military system while convincing contemporaries he was simply restoring traditional Roman virtues. It was perhaps the most successful political sleight of hand in history. Why would a man who had conquered Rome through political maneuvering and proxy generals suddenly take personal command of a difficult military campaign in a remote corner of the empire? This question brings us to the Cantabrian Wars of 2619 BCE, a pivotal moment in Augustus's military transformation that reveals the hidden dimensions of his power consolidation. The rugged mountains of northern Spain had resisted Roman domination for generations. Previous governors had claimed victories over the fierce Cantabrian and Asturian tribes, but actual control remained elusive. These tribes conducted lightning raids against Roman settlements, then retreated to mountain strongholds inaccessible to conventional Roman tactics. For Augustus, this persistent resistance represented both a challenge and an opportunity. The difficulty of the terrain perfectly matched Augustus's needs, writes historian J.S. Richardson. A campaign difficult, enough to justify his personal presence, yet ultimately winnable with sufficient resources and determination. In 26 BCE, for the first and only time in his reign, Augustus personally led legions into battle, establishing his headquarters at Segisama, modern Sassamon, to direct operations against the Cantabrians. Consider the tactical challenges faced by Roman forces in this environment. Traditional legion formations, designed for pitched battles on open ground, proved ineffective against guerrilla fighters who refused conventional engagement. Mountain warfare required smaller, more mobile units capable of independent operation. Archaeological excavations at Roman camps like La Carissa and La Mesa show how forces were distributed in smaller detachments along mountain passes and strategic heights, creating a network of control points rather than a continuous frontier. Military tribune serving under Augustus described the frustration. "We cannot bring them to battle where our advantages would decide the day. Instead, we chase shadows through forests and ravines, always advancing yet never seeming closer to victory." This account captures the psychological challenge of counterinsurgency warfare, a type of conflict Roman forces were poorly prepared to fight. The campaign took an unexpected turn in 25 BCE when Augustus fell seriously ill. This health crisis, downplayed in official accounts but revealed in private correspondence, forced his withdrawal to Tarraco, modern Tarragona, on the Mediterranean coast. Command transferred to his lieutenants, particularly Gaius Antistius Vetus and later Marcus Agrippa. This setback could have undermined Augustus's military credibility, but he masterfully transformed it into an opportunity for the next phase of his power consolidation. What makes this moment pivotal is how Augustus used his illness to transition military command without losing control. Rather than appearing as a defeat, his withdrawal and delegation became a demonstration of imperial administrative efficiency. Augustus showed that his system could function even in his absence, the true test of institutional design. The archaeological record provides fascinating insights into this transition period. At Augustus's headquarters in Tarraco, excavated administrative buildings show evidence of expanded communications infrastructure, quarters for messengers, document storage facilities, and spaces for military councils. Augustus had effectively created the empire's first remote command center, allowing strategic control while delegated tactical authority to field commanders. Marcus Agrippa, Augustus's most trusted general and the architectural genius behind many of his building projects, took command in 19 BCE for the final phase of the Cantabrian Wars. Agrippa brought a ruthless efficiency to the campaign, implementing a strategy of systematic depopulation that forced mountain tribes into valleys where they could be more easily controlled. He made a desert and called it peace, as Tacitus would later describe similar Roman pacification methods. Agrippa's approach reveals a crucial aspect of Augustus's military transformation: the cultivation of commanders loyal to him personally rather than to senatorial authority. Unlike Republican generals who operated with considerable autonomy, Augustan commanders understood their power derived entirely from the emperor's favor. Agrippa, bound to Augustus by friendship, marriage to his daughter Julia, and shared political interests, exemplified this new type of subordinate commander. What would you have done in Agrippa's position? As Rome's most successful general, he could potentially have challenged Augustus for supreme power, yet he consistently subordinated his own ambitions to Augustus's larger vision. This personal loyalty became the model for successful military leadership in the imperial system, competence and initiative within boundaries defined by absolute loyalty to the emperor. The successful conclusion of the Cantabrian Wars in 19 BCE allowed Augustus to declare the entire empire pacified for the first time in generations. This achievement was commemorated with the closing of the doors to the Temple of Janus in Rome, a symbolic act indicating Rome was at peace with all nations. The propaganda value was immense, establishing Augustus as the bringer of peace after decades of civil conflict. Yet while Spain dominated official attention, a more profound military transformation was occurring elsewhere, the creation of the Praetorian Guard. This elite force, ostensibly established to protect the emperor, represented a revolutionary development in Roman military organization. For the first time, a substantial body of troops would be permanently stationed in Italy, directly contradicting republican traditions that had kept the homeland free of regular military presence. The initial Praetorian formation consisted of 9 cohorts of 500 men each, recruited from veterans of the legions and commanded by 2 prefects. While officially framed as a personal protection force, their strategic positioning throughout Italy created a military counterweight to any potential senatorial opposition. Archaeological evidence from early Praetorian installations shows their bases were positioned to control key transportation routes and population centers. Augustus's Praetorian innovation was brilliantly disguised. By drawing on Republican precedent, generals had always maintained personal bodyguards called cohorts, praetoria. He presented this force as traditional rather than revolutionary, yet the scale, permanence, and legal status of the imperial Praetorian Guard represented a fundamental break with the past. The first Praetorian prefects, particularly Quintus Ostorius Scapula and Publius Salvius Aper, faced a delicate balancing act. They needed to demonstrate absolute loyalty to Augustus while establishing the institutional foundations of a force that would outlast any individual. Their success is evidenced by the Guard's endurance as an institution, continuing for over 3 centuries until disbanded by Constantine in 312 CE. But the Praetorian Guard represented just one element of Augustus's military transformation. The Teutoburg Forest disaster of 9 CE provides another critical window into how Augustus leveraged even military failures to advance his broader reforms. When news reached Rome that 3 entire legions under Publius Quinctilius Varus had been annihilated by Germanic tribes led by Arminius in the forests of Germany, the psychological impact was devastating. Augustus reportedly wandered his palace at night, crying out, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." This rare display of public emotion underscored the magnitude of the disaster. The tactical failures at Teutoburg Forest are well documented. Varus ignored intelligence warnings, marched his forces in extended column through dense forest, and failed to establish proper scouting. When Germanic forces attacked, the legions couldn't deploy into their effective battle formations. The result was slaughter. Archaeological excavations at Calcres have revealed mass graves and battle debris extending over several kilometers, confirming the brutality of the defeat. But what historians have often missed is how Augustus used this disaster to consolidate his military reforms. The immediate response, raising new legions to replace those lost, was conducted entirely under imperial authority without senatorial involvement. The emergency bypassed traditional procedures, setting precedents for imperial control of recruitment and legion formation. More significantly, the defeat permanently shifted Roman strategic posture from expansion to defensive consolidation. Augustus issued a strategic directive that the empire should maintain its current boundaries rather than seek further conquests, a policy his successor Tiberius would quote as justification for defensive orientation. This shift aligned perfectly with Augustus's preference for sustainable military deployment along fixed frontiers. A centurion who served during this period observed, "Before Teutoburg, we believed no force could stand against our legions. After, we learned that even the finest army requires proper leadership and deployment." This hard-won wisdom accelerated the professionalization of the officer corps and standardization of tactical doctrine, key elements of Augustus's military reforms. The investigation into the disaster also strengthened imperial control over military appointments. Augustus personally reviewed the qualifications of senior officers, removing those deemed inadequate regardless of their political connections. This unprecedented intervention in what had traditionally been a senatorial prerogative established the emperor's ultimate authority over military leadership. As the Teutoburg crisis subsided, Augustus completed his military transformation by formalizing the structure of the imperial legions. The legions that had once been identified with their founding generals now received permanent numerical designations and unique cognomen, nicknames. Legion 16, 16, and 19, though the units destroyed with Varus, were never reconstituted, their numbers becoming a permanent reminder of the disaster. Through battlefield crisis and administrative reform, personal command and delegated authority, Augustus fundamentally transformed Rome's military from a tool of the Republic into the emperor's army. But his most revolutionary innovation, and the key to making these changes permanent, still lay ahead: creating a financial system that would sustain this new military machine for centuries to come. Can a financial reform represent a military revolution? In the case of Augustus's creation of the Aerarium Militare in 6 CE, the answer is emphatically yes. This seemingly administrative change, establishing a dedicated military treasury, represents the decisive turning point in Rome's military transformation. Before examining this critical innovation, we must understand the financial crisis that necessitated it. The professional army Augustus had created faced a fundamental sustainability problem. Professional soldiers required regular pay during service and retirement benefits after completing their terms. The traditional state treasury, Aerarium Saturni, controlled by the Senate, proved inadequate and unreliable for these ongoing commitments. The genius of the Aerarium Militare, writes economic historian Richard Duncan Jones, was how it solved immediate practical problems while fundamentally realigning power relationships. Augustus presented the reform as a pragmatic solution to veteran settlement issues, but its implications for military control were profound and far-reaching. The new military treasury received initial funding from Augustus's personal fortune, 170 million sesterces according to the Res Gestae, his autobiographical account. This enormous sum established Augustus as the patron of every soldier in the empire, but the long-term funding mechanism proved even more revolutionary: a 5% inheritance tax on Roman citizens and a 1% tax on auction sales. These dedicated revenue streams created financial independence from senatorial budget control. Consider how this changed a legionary's perspective. Previously, his pay and retirement benefits depended on senatorial appropriations vulnerable to political disputes. Now, a dedicated institution guaranteed these benefits, with the emperor as its visible patron. Where would your loyalty lie in such a system? With distant senators or with the emperor who secured your financial future? Archaeological evidence from military diplomas, bronze discharge certificates granting citizenship and benefits to auxiliary veterans, shows how the system operated in practice. A diploma found at Slavonski Brod, Croatia, dated to 71 CE, but following Augustan precedent, specifies precise benefits: citizenship, land allotment, tax exemptions, and marriage rights. The standardization and reliability of these benefits directly linked soldier welfare to imperial authority. In the Senate, this revolutionary change was presented as a traditional reform. Augustus emphasized continuity with republican practices, while fundamentally altering the underlying power dynamics. Senator Asinius Gallus, one of the few who recognized the implications, reportedly objected that the military should remain under the people's authority through their elected representatives. His objection was politely noted and effectively ignored. The Senate's inability to block this reform highlights the brilliance of Augustus's incremental approach. By the time the Aerarium Militare was established, senators had already surrendered. So many individual powers that resisting this particular change seemed both futile and unreasonable. The cumulative effect of Augustus's reforms had reached a tipping point where opposition became nearly impossible. This financial innovation completed the transformation begun with the Augustan settlement of 27 BCE, the constitutional arrangement that formalized Augustus's control while maintaining republican appearances. Under this settlement, provinces were divided between emperor and senate, with Augustus taking personal control of all provinces requiring significant military presence. The strategic calculation behind this division becomes apparent when examining provincial distributions. Spain, Gaul, Syria, Egypt, All regions requiring substantial military forces came under imperial control. Senatorial provinces like Asia, Africa, and Achaia were generally peaceful, requiring minimal military presence. Of Rome's 28 legions, 25 were stationed in imperial provinces under Augustus's direct command. Would you have recognized this power grab disguised as administrative reform? Asks military historian Adrian Goldsworthy. Contemporary senators largely failed to do so, focusing on the preservation of their dignitas, personal honor, and traditional privileges, rather than the fundamental power shift occurring beneath these superficial continuities. A few senators saw through the scheme, but found themselves unable to effectively oppose it. Marcus Antistius Labeo, a distinguished jurist, reportedly refused further political advancement under Augustus, recognizing the hollowness of offices that no longer carried real authority. His passive resistance through legal scholarship preserved republican principles, but couldn't prevent the military transformation underway. The real genius of Augustus's approach lay in how he maintained the appearance of Senate involvement while systematically removing their actual control. Senators still received military commands, but now as imperial legates rather than independent magistrates. They still governed provinces, but under the emperor's supervision. They still participated in military policy discussions, but the final decisions rested with Augustus. Archaeological evidence from the provinces shows how this dual system operated in practice. Milestones and building inscriptions from imperial provinces attribute construction to Augustus directly, while similar monuments in senatorial provinces maintain the fiction of senatorial authority, though often with reference to the emperor's benevolence. The message to provincial populations was clear. Real power flowed from Augustus, regardless of formal arrangements. With control of military finance and provincial command secured, Augustus implemented his next revolutionary reform, the shift to permanent border defense. Republican armies had been mobile forces, campaigning where needed and rarely maintaining permanent installations. The new imperial legions would be stationed in fixed fortresses along the empire's frontiers, creating the first systematic border defense in Western history. This strategic reorientation transformed both military architecture and tactical doctrine. Excavations at Augustan bases like Oberraden and Haltern in Germany reveal the emergence of standardized fortress designs, rectangular playing card layouts with regular interior arrangements that would become the template for legionary bases throughout the empire. These permanent installations included stone administrative buildings, barracks, granaries, and workshops, infrastructure for forces intended to remain in place indefinitely. The psychological impact on frontier populations was calculated and profound. A Germanic tribal leader captured this effect in a comment recorded by Velleius Paterculus. Roman camps are not merely military installations, but the foundations of cities. Where they plant their eagles, there Rome takes root. This perception accelerated the Romanization of frontier regions, turning military occupation into cultural assimilation. For the legionaries themselves, permanent stationing created new identities and relationships. A papyrus letter from Egypt shows a soldier writing to his family, "I serve in the 2nd Legion Triana, stationed at Nicopolis. We are the guardians of Egypt, and the locals know us by name." This regional identification, legions associated with specific provinces and populations, represented a sharp break from the republican pattern of frequent redeployment. Development of specialized auxiliary units complemented this border defense system. Augustus systematically incorporated non-citizens into the military structure through auxiliary cohorts and alae, cavalry units, typically recruited from regions with particular military traditions. Batavian auxiliaries provided exceptional cavalry, Cretan archers offered specialized ranged capabilities, and Balearic slingers brought unique skills to the Roman order of battle. These auxiliary units addressed the tactical limitations of the legions. As a military tribune serving in Syria observed, "The legion is unmatched in pitched battle but blind in unfamiliar terrain. Our Syrian archers and Thracian cavalry become our eyes and ears." This integration of specialized forces created a combined arms approach that maximized Roman military effectiveness. The path to citizenship offered to auxiliary veterans cemented their loyalty to Rome. A military diploma found at Mautern, Austria states, having served 25 years, during which time they prove their valor and loyalty, I grant them citizenship for themselves, their children, and their descendants. This transformative opportunity tied personal advancement directly to faithful service, creating powerful incentives for auxiliary troops despite their lower pay and longer service requirements. The auxiliary system had profound long-term implications. As historian Peter Heather notes, this revolutionary integration of foreigners into Rome's military machine would eventually transform the very definition of what it meant to be Roman. By creating pathways for provincial populations to gain citizenship through military service, Augustus laid the groundwork for the empire's remarkable durability and eventual evolution into a multinational state. By 14 CE, when Augustus died, the military transformation was complete. The temporary citizen militias of the Republic had been replaced by a standing professional army of 28 legions plus auxiliary forces, totaling approximately 300,000 men. Command had centralized under imperial control. Finance had been secured through dedicated funding, and deployment had shifted to permanent frontier defense. Most remarkably, this revolution had been accomplished without triggering the resistance that would have met more overt changes. Augustus had transformed Rome's military machine so gradually, so carefully, that even those living through the process barely perceived its revolutionary nature until the changes became irreversible. As Augustus reportedly told his confidants in his final days, I found Rome defended by annual levies. I leave it protected by professional soldiers. I found military loyalty divided among competing generals. I leave it unified under imperial authority. This transformation would shape Western military development for the next 2 millennia. The military machine Augustus created would define Rome for the next 3 centuries. His transformation established a model of such durability that when the Sassanid king Shapur I defeated Roman forces in the 3rd century CE, he still described his achievement as victory over the Emperor Gordian and 80,000 men arranged in the Roman formation, recognizing the distinctive organization first standardized under Augustus. This standardization represented one of Augustus's most enduring military innovations. The legion he established, typically 5,500 men organized into 10 cohorts, with officers following regular promotion patterns, became so institutionalized that it continued with minimal structural changes until Diocletian's reforms in the late 3rd century. Archaeological evidence from legionary fortresses across the empire reveals remarkable consistency in organization, layout, and function, regardless of location or time period. The Vindolanda tablets, thin wooden writing tablets discovered at a Roman fort near Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain, provide extraordinary insights into daily military life under the system Augustus created. Dating from the late 1st and early 2nd centuries CE, these preserved documents include duty rosters, supply requisitions, personal letters, and military reports that demonstrate how thoroughly standardized military administration had become. 1. Tablet records. There are absent 6 men at the office of the provincial governor, 337 men at Coria, of whom 31 are guards. Total absent, 456. Remainder present, 296. This level of detailed record-keeping and administrative control exemplifies the professional military bureaucracy that developed from Augustus's reforms. Every soldier was accounted for, every resource tracked, every activity documented, creating unprecedented organizational efficiency. The professional career path Augustus established transformed military service from temporary civic duty into a structured occupation with clear advancement opportunities. Inscriptions from legionary tombstones track career progressions. Ordinary soldiers, Miles Gregarius, could advance to immunis, specialist exempt from routine duties, then principalis, staff position, and potentially to centurion for the exceptionally capable. This meritocratic element, advancement based on skill and service rather than solely on social origin, created powerful motivation for discipline and performance. A centurion's epitaph from Carnuntum illustrates this career mobility. Titus, Callidius Severus, 1st centurion of Legion 15 Apollinaris, who began as a common soldier and through 30 years of faithful service rose through every rank. Such advancement stories reinforce the professional ethos Augustus had instilled, where long-term institutional loyalty superseded political factionalism. Perhaps Augustus's most significant military innovation was establishing the emperor as commander-in-chief, a concept so fundamental to modern military organization that we forget it once represented a revolutionary departure. Under the Republic, military command had been divided among multiple elected magistrates. Augustus centralized ultimate authority in a single individual, while delegating tactical control to subordinates, creating the command hierarchy that would define Western military organization for millennia. This centralization created both strengths and vulnerabilities. As military historian Adrian Goldsworthy observes, the Roman army became the most effectively coordinated military force of the ancient world, capable of implementing empire-wide strategy. Yet this same centralization meant that leadership quality at the top became absolutely critical to military effectiveness. The contrast between capable military emperors like Trajan and incompetent ones like Commodus illustrates this double-edged nature of Augustus's system. When the emperor possessed military judgment and administrative skill, the imperial army functioned brilliantly. When imperial leadership faltered, the entire system suffered despite maintaining its basic organizational soundness. The archaeological record provides fascinating evidence of how Augustus's military model evolved through practical application. At Inchtoothill in Scotland, excavations revealed a legionary fortress constructed around 83 CE, over 70 years after Augustus's death, that still followed his basic organizational template, while incorporating refinements based on frontier experience. The standardized layout included headquarters building, Principia, commander's house, praetorium, hospital, valetudinarium, and barracks arranged in a regular grid pattern that would have been immediately recognizable to Augustan soldiers. This architectural consistency reflected the institutional continuity Augustus had engineered. As military historian Lawrence Keppy notes, the remarkable aspect of the Augustan military reforms wasn't their initial implementation, but their durability. They created an institutional framework so robust it survived good and bad emperors alike for 3 centuries. But Augustus's creation also contained the seeds of its own destruction. The Praetorian Guard, established as the emperor's loyal protectors, eventually became kingmakers, even auctioning the imperial title to the highest bidder after assassinating Pertinax in 193 CE. How did an institution designed to secure imperial power become its greatest threat? The inherent danger lay in concentrated military loyalty combined with proximity to power. Unlike frontier legions, the Praetorians were stationed in and around Rome, giving them direct access to the center of government. Their awareness of their pivotal position gradually transformed from protective loyalty to exploitative power. As Cassius Dio observed, the Praetorians learned they could make emperors more easily than emperors could control them. Augustus himself seems to have recognized this potential danger. He limited the Praetorian presence in Rome, keeping most cohorts stationed in nearby Italian towns and maintaining only a minimal ceremonial detachment in the capital. Later emperors, particularly Tiberius and Sejanus, consolidated the guard in a single fortress in Rome, a fateful decision that increased their political leverage. Had you been responsible for designing this system, how would you have prevented the Praetorian Guard from becoming too powerful? The challenge illustrates a fundamental tension in military organization. Forces powerful enough to protect the state inevitably possess the potential to control it. Augustus's solution balanced this tension more successfully than most, but no institutional design could eliminate it entirely. Augustus's frontier policy represents another enduring legacy of his military transformation. His strategic directive following the Teutoburg disaster, that the empire should maintain current boundaries rather than pursue further expansion, established the defensive orientation that would characterize Roman strategy for centuries. This shift from conquest to consolidation fundamentally altered Rome's relationship with neighboring peoples. The physical manifestations of this policy, the German limes, Hadrian's Wall, the Syrian desert frontier, created not just military, boundaries but cultural and economic interfaces. Archaeological research along these frontiers reveals complex interactions between Roman forces and local populations. Rather than simple barriers, these boundaries functioned as managed contact zones where trade, cultural exchange, and selective integration occurred alongside military control. A frontier commander in Upper Germany described this dual function. "We are both sword and shield, protecting Roman territories while extending Roman influence beyond our fortifications." This sophisticated understanding of frontier management emerged directly from Augustus's strategic reorientation from expansion to maintenance. Modern border security operations employ remarkably similar principles, balancing defensive barriers with selective permeability for economic and diplomatic purposes. The American military historian Edward Luttwak explicitly connects contemporary frontier management to Augustan precedents. The Roman frontier system established under Augustus represents the first comprehensive approach to territorial security, combining physical barriers, forward positioning, and diplomatic engagement in ways that remain instructive for modern security planners. The Augustan military model eventually evolved into the late Roman army that transitioned the empire into the medieval period. As historian Hugh Elton notes, the professional army Augustus created proved adaptable enough to evolve with changing circumstances while maintaining its core institutional identity. This adaptability, professional forces adjusting to new threats while preserving organizational continuity, represents perhaps the most significant aspect of Augustus's military legacy. By the time of Augustus's death in 14 CE, his military transformation had created the institutional foundation that would support Roman power for centuries. The senator and historian Velleius Paterculus, writing shortly after Augustus's death, captured this achievement. He found the army a mob. He left it an institution. As Augustus lay dying in 14 CE at Nola, he reportedly asked those gathered around him, "Have I played my part well in the comedy of life?" When they affirmed he had, he responded, "Then applaud as I exit." This theatrical metaphor perfectly captures the essence of his revolutionary achievement. Augustus had orchestrated a complete transformation of Rome's military system while maintaining the illusion of constitutional continuity, perhaps history's greatest political performance. The military revolution Augustus engineered was comprehensive and enduring. He transformed a temporary citizen militia into a professional standing army. He centralized command under imperial control while maintaining the appearance of shared authority. He created a military career path with standardized training, equipment, and benefits, and he reoriented strategic posture from expansion to frontier defense. These innovations collectively created the most effective military machine of the ancient world, professional legions supported by specialized auxiliaries deployed along strategic frontiers, supported by dedicated financial resources, and ultimately answerable to a single commander-in-chief. This basic model would define Western military organization for the next 2 millennia. The professional standing army that Augustus established has become the global standard for military organization. From the smallest nations to global superpowers, virtually every modern state maintains permanent professional forces rather than relying on temporary citizen levies. The specialization, training standards, and institutional continuity Augustus introduced remain foundational concepts in contemporary military doctrine. Career military service with standardized pay, benefits, and retirement provisions. Innovations Augustus introduced define modern military employment worldwide. The military historian Victor Davis Hanson observes, Augustus understood something fundamental about military effectiveness, that economic security creates the conditions for discipline and loyalty. This insight remains as valid for today's volunteer forces as it was for Rome's legionaries. Command centralization under civilian leadership, the emperor as commander-in-chief, established the pattern of civil-military relations that democratic nations still follow. The principle that ultimate military authority rests with the civilian government head, who delegates operational control to professional commanders, originates in Augustus's system. When an American president issues orders as commander-in-chief, they are exercising authority structured along lines Augustus first established. Some historians argue that Augustus's reforms were simply pragmatic responses to immediate problems, rather than visionary redesigns. The military crisis of the late Republic certainly demanded solutions, but the comprehensive nature of Augustus's changes and their remarkable durability suggest more than mere crisis management. As military historian Adrian Goldsworthy notes, Augustus didn't just solve immediate problems, he created systems designed to prevent their recurrence. Unanswered questions about Augustus's military transformation continue to engage historians. Would the Republic's military system have evolved differently without his intervention? How much of his reform was planned versus opportunistic adaptation? Recent scholarship suggests Augustus may have conceptualized his military reforms much earlier than previously believed, potentially during his time with Julius Caesar in Spain and Gaul, where he observed firsthand the limitations of republican military organization. Evidence from Augustus's private correspondence, though fragmentary, indicates he was considering systematic military reforms as early as 35 BCE, well before his victory at Actium. This suggests a more deliberate, long-term vision than the opportunistic model proposed by earlier historians. As one recent analysis concludes, Augustus had mapped the basic architecture of his military transformation decades before implementing it, waiting for the political conditions that would make such changes acceptable. Augustus's final military review took place shortly before his death. According to Suetonius, he personally inspected troops and reviewed unit strength reports despite his failing health. This attention to detail in his final days underscores how central military organization remained to his conception of imperial governance. His famous last words, "I found Rome a city of brick and left it a city of marble," referred to his building program, but a similar transformation characterized his military reforms. He found Rome defended by citizen militias and left it protected by professional legions. He found military loyalty divided among competing generals and left it unified under imperial authority. He found strategic posture focused on expansion and left it oriented toward sustainable defense. This transformation, achieved through patient accumulation of powers and careful institutional design rather than dramatic confrontation, represents Augustus's most enduring legacy. In creating the perfect military machine to protect Rome, Augustus ensured his own power would never be challenged, a lesson in strategic organization that leaders still study today. As the military historian John Keegan observed, Augustus didn't just change how Rome fought its wars, he changed what it meant to be a soldier and what armies meant to states. This revolution in military affairs established patterns so fundamental to Western military thinking that we barely recognize their origin in one man's systematic reforms 2,000 years ago.